Hello and welcome to another episode of Casting Views. This week it's another episode of Mind Wipe, and my guest, who I'll go into shortly, has had to sit there patiently while I've re-recorded this intro about 74 times, is none other than TA Shelano of the Middle-aged Bodcast. Hi TA, how are you doing?
Good evening, Dan. Not too bad, thank you. And it happens to the best of us.
Well, this is what I was saying. It's through the magic of editing, everything appears seamless. But yeah, I've literally, this introduction has taken me about 4 hours. So I think you probably want to wipe your mind of that. So, but I'm not going to give you that opportunity, right?
No, that's fine.
Yeah. So I said your podcast, the Middle-aged Bodcast. So how's that doing? I mean, I think as of time recording, you're just starting your third season, right?
Yeah, that's right. Episode 1 of season 3 has gone out today. Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, I know you obviously interviewed my co-host Raging Rich for one of these a little while ago. I think that went out a couple of weeks back, and yeah, it's been interesting for sort of few months doing it. Really, we've interviewed guests, including your good self. You came on in season 2. Yeah, it's just been a completely different experience, actually, in terms of the conversations that we've had, either with just ourselves or with guests that we wouldn't have had, and those kind of opportunities to speak to people, and that leads to doing things, I suppose, like this as well. So yeah, we've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, because your pod's still fairly young, isn't it?
So we, in terms of launching, yeah, it's sort of 6 months since the first episode, season 1 went out. We started recording in the July, and then the first one went out sort of mid-August. So we did, yeah, sort of 10 episodes plus I think a bonus for season 1, and then we pretty much came virtually straight back into season 2, which took us all the way up to New Year's Eve in terms of schedule, and then we've had a short break to then sort of come back for season 3. In fact, we've just done an interview that's not gone out obviously yet, that we're going out soon, with a world champion.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it's just that opportunity to do different things and interview different people and things like that. So some of the guest episodes, obviously we enjoyed the one we did with yourself, but we've done a few with guests that it's been some really good conversations, and yeah, just the ones where it's just me and Rich as well, sort of bantering with each other and stuff like that. Has been a real good laugh. Obviously, I've known Rich for been best mates for a long time, so yeah, that kind of works. I think quite well as well in terms of bouncing off each other, and when you're trying to work as a sort of a pairing in this kind of thing. I mean, that's the thing people talk about with podcasting. They always say, "Oh, it's just talking," but as you well know, there's so much more obviously that goes into it, much more like a production. Even for us doing this, we're not like the professionals on the TV or anything, but you still put a lot of work and effort goes into the product. So it's been interesting to be part of that from a creative point of view.
It's interesting you say that because, yeah, the professionals, they've probably got people that do a lot of the things for them, whereas we're doing it all ourselves, right?
Well, I think this is it. And the thing, a couple of people have said it to me. It knocks you a little bit, where they go, "Oh, it's just talking." Yeah, but hang on a second. You're missing the bits where, whether it's you got bringing guests, there's all the arranging of bringing guests, and then, you'll write questions for guests, and then it's like Rich does, the editing of the episodes and all that. So it's like, it's not just a case of you just talk,
Yeah.
in terms of there's a lot more that goes into it than that, and more thought that goes into it than that.
Yeah.
So sometimes people sell that down, and they don't sometimes realize the thing that you see, when you're watching television or you listen to sometimes radio, is the amount of people who work on that, helping to make it look that slick or sound that slick. Whereas these sort of things, where unless you can afford to pay people, you've got to do everything yourselves, and and come aboard with all the ideas and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I know obviously you've been doing podcasting for quite a long time now, but yes, you're like a veteran to us, somebody to look to towards the guiding light.
No, thank you. But yeah, I mean, this is the 4th year now, but it's interesting what you say, because not necessarily that I've had people say anything to me, but when I then say to them, like, people will say, "Oh, what are you doing at the weekend?" or this, and I'll often sometimes say, "Oh, catching up with the podcast stuff, because I don't think people necessarily think about the work that goes into it. So like I said, there'll be the planning, which depends on how far you take that. But let's say there's a day for coming up with the idea and planning it. Then you've got to record it. So that's another day. Then if you're fortunate and you're able to get the editing done in a day or so, but I know there are people that take different approaches to the editing. I know there are some people that literally, they record it, they'll put it, the intro and outro, and they just slap it on. And for a lot of people, that's, that it's probably great if they do it in one take. Whereas me, I'll often go through my episodes a couple of times, mainly because I'm not happy with some of the stuff I've said. And it's mainly about sort of cutting things out from me. But, you've got a couple of days, then you've got scheduling, then you've got the social media side of things, which is a whole other kettle of fish now, with so much fragmentation in the social media world. It used to be you were just on Twitter and Instagram, right? Then it's Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Now it's Twitter, Threads, Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok. It's knackering.
I was going to say that is one of the challenges now, isn't it? There's just so much of these outlets and different things that you can't keep up with it. Everything almost, you just sort of try and do what you can. And it's the same in terms of with the whole book thing as well, where you've got people are on all these different platforms, and sometimes you might be sort of linked to friends with people across about 8 platforms or something. They must be like read your same messages I know that you put out on different things, but it's kind of interesting. And obviously with the TikTok thing, where America, there was the whole thing where it's going to get banned, and I know some of the sort of on the American side there was a huge kind of, whoa, hang on a minute, what we're going to do? Well, we've got these other platforms, but that's been quite influential to, I think, a lot of people from businesses and stuff like that. So there's a real panic then if that's massively influential to sales for people in different businesses and things like that. So social media is an interesting one.
Yeah, and we will come on to your book shortly, but a couple of other things about the podcast. So it's interesting what you said about that. You're getting guests. I mean, for me, when I first started the podcast, I initially started with a family member, but then it became just me. And that's when, and even before then, actually, we were starting to get a lot of guests on. And I find it's mixing with the other podcasts. And like I said, when you get someone else on and you're kind of doing something slightly different to your week-on-week stuff, it's those interactions and that slight change in your conversation, which can sometimes bring a renewed interest, or not an interest as such, but a renewed kind of focus on maybe getting, like I said, more guests and the conversations you might have outside of your normal subjects.
I mean, I think there's definitely a balance to it. In terms of season 1, we had 3 guests, and none of those guests were podcasters, interestingly enough. And we sort of stuck towards topics that we kind of felt were really relevant to sort of the Middle-aged Bodcast brand. You kind of, in season 2, we had a lot more guests. We ended up with twice as many guests. We ended up having 6. So we had 6 guests, I think, across 10 episodes. And I think the conclusion in the end was we probably had too many guests in that sense. We should have almost, even if you'd recorded them, maybe then had some held back for now season 3, which we didn't hold any back. So then you're in the position of finding obviously more guests, which isn't always easy. And then you got the scheduling with guests as well, as as you'll appreciate. So we kind of came out of season 2 and we're a bit like, actually probably we should have kept a couple of those episodes maybe back, and sort of thought about that more. But it just became the point where people were obviously keen to do it and whatnot. So you kind of go, let's do it. And some of them, some really great episodes, but you think, oh yeah, maybe we could have saved a couple back. But it's just balancing that out sometimes. And we actually had some feedback from some of the listeners saying, actually, we felt like a bit in season 2 we lost a little bit then of what you guys were doing around your sort of your weigh-ins and things like that, because you had so many guests. You drifted a little bit away from that. So one of the things about the season 3 was trying to bring some of that back in a bit more as well, if that's the sort of thing that people enjoy and resonate with. So it's trying to find your way and doing different things, isn't it? And some things obviously work better than others, but I think overall it's been interesting talking to guests.
And it's going to change over time. I mean, what I'm doing now, I'm not going to say it's like radically different from episode 1, but I've introduced a lot more sub-series. I started doing some of them as bonus episodes, but then I thought, why not just integrate it into the routine? So I started doing some TV deep dives. Well, I know you know about like the pilot views, etc. I did
Yeah.
a deep dive into Black Mirror, and Mind Wipe and the dinner party episodes again was something that evolved. So yeah, I think it's a case of your podcast will be whatever you want it to be, and that could be something completely different in 6 months' time. But going right back, I should have actually asked you at the start, though, if you just wanted to give people just that maybe aren't subscribed, just a little overview of what the podcast is and what they can expect.
So the Middle-aged Bodcast is effectively sort of two best mates, middle-aged men, kind of not in the best fitness, shall we say, maybe in terms of our BMI. So there's the sort of starting point for it really was us talking about trying to improve this sort of age of where we are in life, of trying to get a bit fitter, obviously lose a bit of weight, trying to improve health and sort of cooking and all those sort of things. So a lot of it is kind of us bantering around that in the episodes where it's just me and Rich. And then there's been other bits more from the creative point of view where Rich and I talked about the fact we once wrote a bit of a film script together and then we should have done it. And then actually a version of what we did has been done in America by obviously far more successful people than ourselves. And we were like, oh, well, we did have an interesting idea, what we were doing. So we covered an episode around that, obviously the book. And then we sort of veered into as well, kind of like the more physical health, mental health with guests as well. So we've had guests on the show where we've sort of gone into that in a bit more detail. And I think the thing we've tried to do, even though it's two men, we've also opened it out in the sense of we've actually interviewed a lot of women guests as well. So we haven't kind of made it exclusive to two blokes talking about blokes type stuff. We've kind of gone across the board and tried to sort of, speak to people that, maybe you'd think two middle-aged blokes wouldn't, even sometimes, in terms of, some of our guests. So, it's been interesting just sort of doing that really, but we try and have a bit of a laugh and when we've covered serious topics we also do that properly as well and cover serious topics.
I think it's a fantastic idea for a podcast, really. It's actually quite a refreshing one in terms of what's out there, and even I've been following on your Instagram. Wasn't it the chicken satay? Was that the, I was following that with interest. So yeah, do you want to explain that?
So the chicken satay, and it's actually covered in the episode that's gone out today, the first episode of season 3. That became this long-running sort of joke, really, that Rich got me to look through a cookbook in an episode and sort of talking about ideas for things he could cook.
Yeah.
And then it became this sort of long-running thing about that he was going to cook this satay at some point. We even had some listeners actually say, when is he actually ever going to do this? And then he has now done it. So part of today's episode actually covers me kind of talking to him about that. So yeah, that became like a bit of a long running sort of thing, really. It was just daft things, really. We had that, and there was another thing where I was complaining about the chair that he had, because we usually record Rich's, and the chair I was using was not great for my back. So we then had this big thing about, when are you going to get me a chair, a suitable chair for the podcast. That we made a joke about. It was I'd got my lawyers onto it for my contract, and all that kind of stuff. And eventually he was getting a new office chair, and he gave me the old one to sit in to record. So that became a bit of a running theme as well through the last season, that when am I getting my chair? So it was the chair and the satay. So it's just, some of it's a bit light-hearted, and it's sort of banter between us. So you go from that into sometimes quite serious topics as well. And we covered men's mental health in an episode last season with a woman who's been a huge advocate and done an awful lot for men's mental health, which was that was a really interesting episode to do. And it's just interesting exploring sort of different ideas, really, with people and doing that. And then the other one was, we had someone who's British, but they're living in America, who's obviously trying to do a lot around independent authors. So again, that was quite an interesting thing. So we ended up having a few hours where we recorded and they did an episode for us that went out in season 2 just before Christmas. And then in the next few weeks, there's one that I'm doing because they interview an author a week. So there's one where I'm interviewed as an author, and then there's one going out as a bonus that's with me and her interviewing me and Rich.
Okay.
As a bonus episode. So and that's going out, but we did those kind of 3 in an afternoon into an early evening and stuff like that, which again was really totally different and an enjoyable thing to do, and that you wouldn't do without doing this kind of thing. So yeah.
I know, and I was just saying, I'm just looking at the Instagram now, so I'm seeing the satay there, and also the 1,000 listens that you celebrated as well. So recently, so it's obviously going to be more than that now. But yeah, it's great to see that tick over, isn't it?
Yeah, so we kind of we were hoping to try and get that figure in by the end of the year. And I think it ended up being kind of mid Jan in the end across all platforms. But yeah, I think when we started, we both said, if you got even a handful of people ever listen, you think that that'd be great. And some of the episodes have done well, particularly I suppose some of the guest ones. If you've got guests have their own followings, or they pushed us, people that they know listen who wouldn't ordinarily listen and may only listen to that episode and don't stick with you. But it doesn't matter, or others where people dip in or come back. But yeah, I think it's kind of it's done. I think we've been surprised actually in that sense of how positive it has been. I mean, yeah, obviously maintaining that and seeing how season 3 goes, and we'll see what happens, I guess. But yeah, no, it's been better than what I think we would have hoped for, really.
Yeah, so check out. So it's a Middle-aged Bodcast. Check that out where you get your podcasts. On Twitter, it's the @Mid-aged Podcast, and I'll shout out the Instagram as well. So it's the same. It's a Mid-aged Podcast there. So yeah, if you're not already, please do go follow, because I'll say it to your face, well, but yeah, you and Rich are a couple of good guys as well. Do you know what I mean? It's always nice meeting people that you can just chat and feel at ease to for an hour or so. But I did say to you also, because the other thing, obviously, of yours, it came up when Rich was on the show as well, is your book, which I'm always in awe of people that come on and say they've written a book. So do you just want to give a little bit of info about your book, and also what else is currently going on?
So it became essentially, I started before COVID, and I hadn't got very far, and I went to a writer's retreat literally just before the first lockdown, did a bit more, and then sort of lockdown kicked in. It's like, right, well, this is prime opportunity to carry this on. And yeah, so it's all the while now, down the years later, is a final product. The Doctor's Hidden Patients is a sort of fast-paced thriller, really, set in 1999, about this sort of scientist, effectively, that's had been making half human, half robot hybrids in a warehouse, and not to give it away, but he dies, and quite early on in the book, and it's his kids basically picking up the pieces of what's happened, and they're under a lot of danger as a result of what he's done, and it becomes this sort of almost like cat and mouse game of who they can trust and to keep them safe, etc. So yeah, that was it, and it's it came out in October, and it's again been really good. For the most part, the people that have read it have been really positive. Yeah, it became a bit of a labour of love, to be honest. And I'd listen to people on sort of radio or TV talking about having written books and things like that. And then when you do it, you go, wow, this is quite a task. And there's Richard Osman, who's obviously a very successful author now, but in his first book at the end, he said, I never realised how hard this was. And I totally agree with him. And then, for reasons best known to myself, I'm in the midst of a second one. So The Doctor's Hidden Patients is available currently as an ebook on my website, but you can get paperbacks on Amazon. And I think if you're sort of in America, through Draft 2 Digital, you can get it from various sites through there in paperback and ebook as well. there's been, again, another interesting creative process to have gone through, and connecting with people in the author community, much like with the podcasting, that you wouldn't ordinarily, and seeing how that's all been, and been through that kind of process of actually trying to go down the traditional publishing route and some of the battles that brings, versus then self-publishing in the end, with Rich obviously supporting me a bit with it on the technical side of that as well. And then in the midst of a second one at the moment, which isn't a direct sequel, but there are links back. So it's this one's set in 2027, and so big gap in timeline from the first one. And so I'm linking it back to the first one, and I'm in the midst of a 100-day writing challenge at the moment, where I've been trying to see
your updates.
I'm holding myself to account. It's one of those things where I wanted to get more consistent, because sometimes it's like things are busy, you dip in and out, and you lose traction with what you're doing, and sometimes you'll spend time having to reread to get back to where you were. So I was trying to sort of find a way of improving that, and I'd read various things people talk about, and the consistency thing is obviously one thing, and it just led into this. Well, try and do something every day. It doesn't have to be loads. Obviously, some days you're going to have more of an opportunity than others, but just to do something each day, keep a track of that, keep accountable to that, and see how you get on. And today, at time of recording, I think we're on day 33, and I'm up to 17,359 words, I think, across the 33 days. So probably 500-ish words a day average. Obviously, some of the weekends, and I went to a writer's retreat where I did a couple of thousand. Obviously balances that out, but just keeping that going, and the momentum I've found, you get more into than the development with the story and the characters, and you haven't got to keep going back and rereading, because you're in the flow of where you go, where you're going. And when I started drafting the second book probably about March last year, when I first put pen to paper. And when I started the challenge, which was obviously at the beginning of this year, I was at 35,000. So I'm now over 52,000. And the first book was finished up around 84. So in terms of getting to a first draft, kind of staying in that sort of zone of trying to work to that and keep disciplined and consistent.
Yeah, and and I'll put all the links in, but I remember how I felt when I saw my podcast going out in feeds for the first time. So come on, it's got to be great seeing your book up on Amazon, right? And seeing it sell.
That is, but the other thing that was, when I think whether you go down the traditional publishing route or a self-publishing route, the other one that was, and I've seen other people mention this as well, is when you actually see it in a book, physical copy. And now not everybody, I guess some people may only start with, they might only have ebooks and they might not have that. I mean, I found in the end, searching online, trying to find printers and do obviously a cost that would make it effective. And I did find one. And so I had them then delivered, ordered like 50 of these books as a bit of a starter and see how you get on. And the day they kind of arrive and you open it and you see it in a book, that was quite something, because something that's just kind of spent so long on a laptop screen to then suddenly see it in a book.
Well, and about 4 years of your life as well, right?
It's got, there's a lot gone into that over a long period of time. That was quite something. And I've seen a lot of authors on social media as well talk about that, whether the publishers sent them, if they've got their own publisher, or if they've, gone down the self route and they've ordered them, that is quite a feeling of an achievement then when you see it in that format. And then the bit where if you sell one to people and then suddenly they'll be talking to you about your book, that's really strange then, of like, oh, that's somebody's actually taking the time, even if it's people you might know or sort of vaguely know, you think, oh, they're being kind, but then they're actually reading it and talking to you about it and stuff like that. It's like, it's that's quite something. I do find it's an interesting challenge.
Well, I applaud you. As I've said to a couple of people who've been on here and written a book, I just think it's fantastic to be able to do that. I mean, some people, I remember years ago thinking I had a story in me, and you kind of sit down and and then that's it. Nothing came out. You know, it's just incredible. I think an incredible achievement to get done. So well played, well played.
Thank you.
Right. Well, look, we are going to get on with the main focus of the episode. But before we do, I just want to play a trailer of a good friend of mine and the show. He's the founder of the PodPack Collective. So I'm going to play the trailer from Chat Tsunami.
Welcome to Chatsunami, a variety podcast that discusses topics from gaming and films to anime and general interests.
Previously on Chatsunami, we've analysed what makes a good horror game, conducted a retrospective on Pierce Brosnan's run as James Bond, and listened to us take deep dives into both the Sonic and Halo franchises.
Also, if you're an anime fan, then don't forget to check us out on our sub-series, Chatsunani, where we dive into the world of anime. So far, we've reviewed things like Death Note, Princess Mononoke, and the hit Beyblade series.
If that sounds like your cup of tea, then you can check us out on Spotify, iTunes, and all good podcast apps.
As always, stay safe,
Stay awesome, and most importantly,
Stay hydrated.
Right, we are back. So, TA, obviously you know what this is about because we had Rich on a little while back. And I love these episodes because I'm just always fascinated to know what people are going to pick. And I remember at the time, Rich kind of, not bamboozling me, but he picked some options that hadn't been on here before. And I think that's the thing I love, is just seeing what makes people tick. So I'm going to throw some subjects at you, some categories. You're going to give me 1 to 3 examples from them that you would love to relive for the first time again, and why. Now, these don't have to be the best, you know, like your most favorite things from these categories, but the examples that in the back of your mind think, yeah, I wish I would be able to forget it and live it again for the first time. I've got the categories here. I'm going to throw them at you in a random order. So we are going to start with, I think always a good one to start with, TV shows.
Yeah. And I'll start by saying I think you'll probably find I'll have different options to Rich as well. Because although
Okay.
we're like, you know, sort of best mates, co-hosts, whatever,
Yeah.
we do often have different tastes in things as well. So these will be a bit different. So the first one on my TV show list has got to be, and I appreciate this is something I think you've covered on this sort of on your podcast before, but Breaking Bad,
Okay.
I think would be definitely has to be one on my list. So me and Mrs. Shelano have now actually watched Breaking Bad in its entirety 3 times.
Wow. Okay.
Which might suggest we like it. I don't think we'll watch it for a 4th time, but yeah, I think that stands up as just, we were late to it. So we, you know, so much so we ended up actually getting it on DVD rather than through streaming. And there's an interesting story to that, which is another reason why I've picked it, is that you'll probably laugh at. But I think aside from the fact that, well, Bryan Cranston, I think is incredible in it. I think there's a lot of incredible performances in it. Aaron Paul is just absolutely amazing in it, I think. And it's interesting, I don't know, you know, that he wasn't wanted so much by, when he auditioned, by the sort of the people making it. And it was Vince Gilligan, who sort of the writer and who, you know, executive producer, who really fought for him to be in it as somebody who at the time wasn't so well known. And definitely the right choice. I just think that the writing, the acting, it used to keep us on the edge of our seats. I'm not kidding you. We used to sit there of an evening and it'd be like getting quite late. And, you know, we used to do this thing when we go, one more. And we just kept doing it. And some of the episodes, like, your palms would be sweating. It was just the tension and, you know, yeah. But the funny thing was, yeah, we ended up sort of buying some of the seasons sort of on DVD. But I don't, for reasons best known, the last season they split in 2.
Right.
And so if you bought it on DVD, what happened was they'd sort of split it. So Mrs. Shelano had ordered what she thought was the final season in its entirety, but it was split.
Right.
And without giving anything away, but it's fine, I think now, isn't it? We can cover this in terms of it's been out long enough. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So
Spoilers
it finished.
For Breaking Bad.
So the last episode that we finished on in the last season when of that was where Hank is sat on the toilet at Walt's, right?
Yeah.
Realizing who his brother, all the rest of it. And it finished. And I went, that can't be it. That can't. can't be it. So I ended up, going on sort of Google and going, I was like, there's more there's another sort of second set of the final season, and I'm like, order it now. And it was like sort of mad sort of scramble to like get those last episodes sent sort of to the house on DVD.
Imagine if you being on the toilet was the final scene of a show.
I mean, to be fair, in one sense, if when you've seen it, you go, that would have been an amazing end in one way of a complete cliffhanger of, oh no, it was, blah, blah. But then obviously what follows. Yeah. So I think for me, and again, anything I could probably sit through and watch 3 times.
Absolutely.
For 60 odd episodes it's up there for me.
Yeah, I think it's a great show. Before we go into your next one, I mean, for me, like you, I got to it late. It was a show my wife didn't want to watch, so I kind of watched it when I got some time to myself to watch it. Now, I'm the sort of person that even if I love a show, I can only watch so much of it in a go because I'll start to not lose interest, but distractions will creep in, like my phone or something. But that was one show where I was like you, I had to watch as much as I could when I could. And I won't say any just in case you mentioned them, but for me, only a handful of shows have been compelling enough to keep me watching another episode. And as you said, I think the performances, the writing, but and just some of the performances, like when it's Hank, isn't it, the brother-in-law, when he realizes who he is and kind of what happens to him. I mean, I was like jaw dropped. It was just great TV. So absolutely, I'm with you on that one. Great start. So what's your next show?
So staying on drama and staying in America, the next one on my list that I can't pass up without saying, I think has got to be The Sopranos.
Great choice. Yeah.
Now, I've seen that one through twice now. It's very different to Breaking Bad in a lot of ways, but it still really stands up in so many other ways, for me. But James Gandolfini's performance in that is just absolutely unbelievable, really. And the premise, I think, of having a mob boss going to see a psychiatrist,
brilliant,
all those the things and the way that played in and what that brought out was just so clever. And some, again, really inspired other cast members in that as well. Interestingly, on that point, Mrs. Shelano did buy me for Christmas a few years ago. Some of the cast members were coming over to the UK and were doing sort of these, they do these shows now where they go and do like talks and they talk about their experience. So there was 3 cast members were coming over and we're doing that. And she got me tickets for the Christmas, and it was going to be a few months later, and that was going to be in Birmingham, and it got cancelled because of COVID.
Oh no! And
then it they tried to redo it, and then it got cancelled again because of obviously how long sort of COVID dragged on for. And in the end, it never happened, and we ended up just getting like refunded, and that was so disappointing because you had, let me get this right, you had Michael Imperioli, who played Christopher Moltisanti. Obviously, the relationship between sort of Tony and his nephew. So he was going to be coming. Steve Schirripa, who played Bobby Bacala, which was obviously became his brother-in-law in it, didn't he? As again, what I think is a great side character, actually, who developed through the show. And then the third one was Vincent Pastoria, who played Pussy, who, of course, got killed off, for being a snitch or whatever. That was going to be the trio. And I just think that would have been great to actually go and listen, to them talking about that. So I was really gutted that happened. But in terms of the show, just think it stands the test of time. It's obviously quite a while ago now. I think it was 99 to 2007. And again, much like Breaking Bad, came to it later. Wasn't something I particularly picked up on when it was first out. And I think in the UK it was on Channel 4, I think possibly.
Yes, I think
early days. And I don't think I really picked up. It was a very late night kind of program. But that's been another one that we've really, really enjoyed watching. Some great writing and acting in that.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. So I've only seen it the once, but I mean, I grew up, I love all the gangster, the mob films, the mafia thing. I love all that. And as you said, I think the premise being around him seeing a psychiatrist or a therapist it's just superb because of just we've not seen that before. And just that relationship and the interactions and probably what he was telling her, that kind of was a great setting for everything that then sort of transpires in his life as well, isn't it? It's just a great idea.
The other side of it as well is that often Mrs. Shelano compares me to him. So on occasion, it's been suggested that I bore a slight passing resemblance to James Gandolfini, and apparently sometimes taking his attitude. I think for the benefit of your podcast, that does not mean I'm a mob boss who runs a nightclub or anything like that. But as in, for example, he would do things like he'd be in the kitchen eating ham out the fridge, right?
Yeah.
And Mrs. Shelano would go, "He is. It's you. You do that, you know." And in fact, the Shelano thing is partly inspired. That is part of the name is homage to that. It's a merging of two characters, and one of those is.
Okay. Okay, nice. And the only other thing I'll say before we kind of move on is growing up in an Italian family, and there are certain scenes that stick out in my mind, and they're not necessarily sort of the big scenes, but I think it's in the first episode where I can't remember who it is, but is it Paulie and someone are talking? They're in a coffee shop and they're lamenting like the modern coffee and like it's those barista machines rather than the proper little Italian coffee machine. And it's just that stuck with me because I can imagine that's probably conversations that the older generations are having, you know, and it's something that's always stuck with me.
There's another one in it as well. I mean, obviously it was kind of still early days, mobile phones when it first come out. But I think there's a bit where, you know, Tony says we were better off without these things or something. And then now that looks quite, again, reflective of how that's happened with society, with the phones, and how that's evolved massively in that time frame. But there's those little throwaways. And then I think it was Paulie again in an episode where they go to try and effectively, you know, continue their running of a racket. And they've been used to being able to go to sort of local shopkeepers and sort of, you know, give us your money and we'll look after you and all this sort of stuff. And then they go to what's now like a brand chain and they go in and try it. And the guy goes, "What are you talking about? You know, all will happen is I'll get sacked and head office and put somebody new in next week or something." And Paulie and that walk out and he goes, "It's over for us," or sort of over for the little guy or something. And it's just, again, another thing on modern society where that sort of local is gone and it's sort of, it kind of picked up on things that have globalization and all those. So all those things that have actually gone on massively since the show. It was like early little dips actually into some of that really. But just the relationships between them all and whatnot. And some of it, and obviously the brutality of some of it as well at times. But it was... it's a great show and probably not the sort of thing that would get made again in reality now. A lot of it,
I probably wouldn't have the patience to do it over as many seasons as it got as well.
No.
I know Joey from the Game Club pod, I'm talking to him as we're recording that, he's watching it and he's really into it. So I'm going to ask you, this is one I probably won't spoil, or Joey, maybe fast forward 30 seconds from now. What's your view on the finale, yay or nay?
I don't think it's the best, I'll be honest. And obviously you watch it when you watch it and you go, huh? And I think when it went out at the time, you know, people who'd obviously followed the show were a bit bemused and baffled by, you know, I think there were people that thought something had gone wrong with the episode, you know, it sort of, you know, cuts off and all the rest of it of like, sorry, is something gone on with the transmission? So I don't think it's the best in one way. I mean, it kind of leaves the ambiguity, doesn't it, of did he get or didn't he? But, you know, I'm not sure whether that's the best ending in some respects.
One more thing. The funny thing with me, when I watched it, I had Virgin TV. I was watching it on their on-demand sort of service. And by the time I got to the finale, they took it off. So I never actually saw the finale for about a year or two because it just disappeared. So, the wonders of streaming, right? So,
and not to do another plug for the Middle-aged Bodcast, but our episode that goes out next week talks about some of these issues.
Really? Oh, there you go. Well, yeah, keep an eye on that. Okay, 2 great shows there. So what's your next one?
So I have got another one. I want to balance out the sort of the murder and the drama and all the rest of it. So with a comedy. And weirdly, I'm sort of realising when I look at it, I've stayed completely the other side of the Atlantic, and which is weird because I do like a lot of British shows. But the third one I've gone for, and I don't know whether this is something you're into or not, but Everybody Loves Raymond.
Oh, do you know, I've never seen that. It's not that I don't like it. I've seen episodes of it, but I've never sat there and watched it as a show. Yeah,
it's interesting because again, you mentioned the whole sort of Italian, thing from your point. That would be perfect to watch that through. Just a recommend as a recommendation because there's quite a lot of in terms of that being an Italian sort of background family. But I love that show. Absolutely loved that program. I think it's one of the best American comedies. I mean, there's a few. I really me and Mrs. Shelano really like Modern Family as well.
Yes,
it's another one we came to quite late, but we really like that. But this, I mean, obviously, again, it's a bit old now. I think it was 96-7 to 2005, something like that. But it's just so good, and the characters are so accurate that they kind of transcend, I think, certainly countries, even cultures. My favourite character in it, well, probably 2 actually, but is the mother and the father. Marie, played by, the late Doris Roberts. Absolutely, that performance and that character of that mother-in-law type, everybody can see they've got that either in their own family or recognise that character, and it's so beautifully played. And then Peter, again, late Peter Boyle, who played Frank, that sort of cantankerous sort of old man character sitting on the sofa, sort of scratching his making inappropriate remarks. Again, everybody either knows somebody like that or has somebody like that in their family. It's just great dynamics of writing around families and stuff like that. And the performances are great. I think it's definitely up there. There's some really superbly funny episodes in that some of which probably, again, the way modern world's go, wouldn't be appreciated today. But there's some great stuff in that.
Because that's quite an old one as well, isn't it? In the sense of it's got to have been about what sort of 15 years or so.
Yeah, I think it's 9. I think it started in 96 or 97.
Oh wow! So maybe
ran
in the
90s. to I think it ran to about 2005. I think it ran.
Okay. Wow. Yeah.
Again, it's something else I came later to and used to see it. Used to be on Channel 4 and all the rest of it, and then actually I ended up. We still liked DVDs. We actually got all of those on DVD in a big box set actually, and we occasionally just love to put an episode on.
Yeah,
just because it's just 20 minutes of fun, of a laugh for the most part.
For us, that was Frasier. That was what we used to love sticking on in the background. But Everybody Loves Raymond. Was it Patricia Heaton?
So Patricia Heaton, plays his wife. Again, her performance is good as the sort of long-suffering wife, long-suffering daughter-in-law kind of character. They cast Brad Garrett, who's obviously been in various films and whatnot, who's a huge kind of tall guy who obviously looks nothing really like Ray Romano. And I don't think initially he was the sort of thing they were going to go for as a casting, but the dynamic between them of Ray being the favourite and him kind of not being, and whatnot, and he's still, for the most part of the show, he's often living over the road at the parents and all the rest of it, and how adoring, Marie's more towards Ray than Robert in it is just so funny. I mean, there's one scene that they do in a funeral parlour when an elderly neighbour has died. He's just, honestly, again, probably be seen as in poor taste now, but it is an absolutely hilarious scene, the way it plays out with all of them. And it's, you just can't help but laugh. So that's probably one of my favourite comedy ones.
Well, that's 3 big hitters you've got there in the first subject alone. So we'll now move on to, I'm going to pick this one because I'm not a big reader anymore, so I probably won't know so much about these, but I want to do books, and obviously with your kind of background as an author. It'd be interesting to see what you choose for books. Yeah.
So books is interesting because although I'm writing fiction, and again, I do read fiction, but I also really like real life stuff. So actually, a lot of my choices here are much more towards that than
Okay.
they are towards fiction. So yeah, I've got kind of some good ones here, I think, hopefully. But one that I've not read for a long time, but we covered back at college, I think, actually, in English. It's British, but it's American. So it's Bill Bryson. If you've
Okay.
heard of
Yeah.
him, who's the American, and he did Notes from a Small Island when he basically came to the UK. That is such a funny book, and his observations and takes on that time when he was here. It's so well written, and in terms of his humour in it, that's one of probably one of the funniest things I can remember reading. I've not read it for a long time. It's probably one, although we're calling this mind wipe, I actually now can't remember a lot of it because it's so long ago that I read it, to the point whereby I want to read it again anyway. And probably this has inspired me to do it. But yeah, that's a great book. If you want to sort of read something and somebody sort of poking fun but in the right way at things, that's a really good one. So I like that.
My wife was a fan of Bill Bryson, so I know when I met her, she had his books. So they were kind of were they all travel based, or
a lot of it was around travel type stuff. There was another one of his I've read that I can't, again, long time ago, but I can't think of the name of now. I don't think it was as good as that one, actually. I think that the Notes from a Small Island one definitely stands out for me, and obviously we sort of were studying it from a college point of view as well, about his observations of things and what he sort of said. So that's my kind of memory of that. So yeah, my mind is pretty much wiped because of how long it's been. so I'm going to revisit that.
It's funny though, isn't it, when you start looking at these things, that it's it's generally the things that maybe you haven't thought about in a while, but that hit you, isn't it? It's funny how that creeps up on you. What's your next book?
So I like motivational stuff as well, and I'm sort of torn a little bit on this, but I've had to go, I think, with him because of his legendary status, and that so many of the things I think that he says can actually resonate to any of us, really. So I've gone with Be Useful, the 7 Tools for Life by Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Oh, okay. I wasn't expecting him as the author there.
So again, regardless of what I suppose what people think of him, and I'm not going to pretend. I've heard things where people have said he's not the most pleasant individual, but I do think he comes out with some very inspirational and motivational stuff for anybody, and it's certainly something that even now, doing the 100-day writing challenge, he kind of inspires that quite a bit, because he makes a big thing around, if there's something you could do, even if it was for an hour a day, whether it was to physically improve or to mentally improve, over a year, that's 365 hours of something.
Yeah.
And how much further forward that could take you in whatever you're doing. And that's really sticking with me at the moment in terms of doing that process with the writing. If it's 30, 40 minutes or it's it very much plays into that. And I'm seeing the benefit of that. So again, when he talks about it, obviously from various things that he did, whether it's the physical fitness or when he went to his acting classes, or learning English, or doing different things to learn more about politics, and then he was going into that. The way he kind of talks about it, you can apply it to your own life, and that book doesn't play at you from a, hey, this is really successful Arnold Schwarzenegger who's had these amazing different careers of being a bodybuilder, the highest paid actor, and then, governor of California. It comes at it from of what could you do in your own life kind of way at you. And I found that really interesting in terms of, you read that and go, yeah, actually, we all make a lot of excuses for, not doing things. And that sort of thing really does give you a bit of a, actually, there's no reason why you can't, with the right sort of discipline, do some of these things.
I'm just looking it up now on Amazon. Yeah, it's interesting. I'd not heard he'd done that. I'd read his autobiography years ago. But yeah, this is an interesting book. As you said, very motivational sounding. Yeah.
It's a fairly new one. I read the Total Recall one he did before as well, which is a good one. But this one is, it's because it's giving you that. What could you take from it to improve your own life? And there are definitely things there, you know, that you go, yeah, that really resonates. And he did the thing I often talk about. He did a motivation speech. I don't know if you might have seen it. It went viral a few years ago, where he's given a talk somewhere about success and whatnot. And he just does this whole thing around time and how there's 24 hours in a day. You need to organise your day, and it's really interesting when he starts to break it all down. And he talks about, you know, how he used to apply his time to different things. You can't really argue with it, and it's just really, you know, it's a bit like doing this. You know, if somebody said to you, "What are you doing that for?" Arnie's view against all of that is, people said that to me all the time. You're never going to do this. You're never going to do that. He goes, only whenever I hear no, I would go, that's a yes. He goes, I hate naysayers and all that. So people who do other people, you know, he goes into all of this kind of mentality of stuff. And you go, yeah, actually, there's some real good logic in that. You know, because, you know, you'll probably have had it with podcasting. We'll have had it with writing the book. You know, you do get people who are a bit like you know, that kind of almost, really? I mean, I sort of joked about it in the foreword of my book. My wife's friend said, what was it now? Oh, you know, I finished a book. And she said, what, reading one?
Yeah.
You know, so I put that in the foreword of the, you know, that kind of almost insulting you know, it's that kind of thing. So he talks a bit around that.
People's reactions, isn't it? It's
well, he says they told him there's no way you're ever going to become this sort of famous actor and all the rest of it, because you don't look right in terms of, you know, the bodybuilding thing isn't a thing that they wanted at the time and all the rest of it. He said, and then his accent, he said, but then all of a sudden, when they want somebody to talk like a machine, my accent was perfect. And then he said, and then when they wanted to do Conan, well, they said if I hadn't auditioned, they'd have had to build somebody to look like it, you know. So it's just funny how things turn around. But yeah, I really recommend the book more from a point of view of how you look at it and go, what can you do individually to improve your own life? And there's definitely tips and hints in there.
Okay, nice. And what's your final choice?
So that was more lighthearted. The third one, which it's a book that's, I think, originally released about 20 years ago now. And it's called They, swear word, F, You Up, by Oliver James. And it basically goes into the dynamics of how effectively your parents ruined your life.
Okay. I'm seeing it now. Sorry, if I look distracted, it's just I'm looking these up as well, yeah. Yeah, how to survive family life. Yeah. I
have to say, it's quite a read. I think they may have done an update on it since, but the copy I had, I think, was an original one. And I read this. Funny enough, I read 2 books on holiday last year. One was about podcasting that Raging Rich bought me, which was to read before we started.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
which I think we talked to you about when we spoke to you before. And the other book I read was this, which was not exactly light reading round the pool, I've got to tell you. And Mrs. Shelano was a bit like, why are you reading that? That looks a bit intense. Yeah. And I'm like, it is. I said, but it's absolutely fascinating. And it just goes into all these different things. And you're like, you know, that's so true, you know, about how people kind of almost, within families, people become almost characters. And people hold them to being the same character no matter what. And he taught, you know, and almost like you've got this role that it don't matter whatever you did, you'd only ever be, oh, do you remember that year when you got up late, or you were late for the dinner, or you did, you know, it's always this kind of scenario. And there's just different things it goes into about, it goes into all sorts of depths about how, you know, parents might treat the first kid versus the second kid. And honestly, and then the thing around people in prison about the relationships they had with their parents and all of those sort of things. It gets into the real detail of serial killers, even about
Really?
how
Wow.
their mother treated them when they were a child and the things they sometimes did, and they'd talk to them about it, and it'd be a retaliation of, well, I hated her because she looked like my mother, or it was just so I had to kill her, and it's just wow. This is I'm I want to keep your podcast light, but I'll be honest, as a book, it's a thrilling read, and I think there's a bit in it where he says anybody who is a parent or wants to be a parent should read this book first. It should be the law or something of like you should have to read this so you don't destroy the next generation of people.
That
and it
sounds and looks really interesting, actually.
I genuinely, couldn't put this. You'd sit around the pool. It's not the normal sort of book that you'd read around the sort of hotel pool, etc. But yeah, I was enthralled by it. It was absolutely fascinating.
I think I'm tempted by that.
You're more tempted by that than The Doctor's Hidden Patients, aren't you? To be honest.
No, that'll be getting a plug. I've got that bookmarked here as well. No. We really are products of our environment, aren't we? That's the thing.
It gets a lot into all of that sort of stuff, about, whether people are inherently bad or is it where do circumstances contribute to what happens with people as they grow up and how their brain has been affected by what it's experienced at a younger age and all of these sort of things. It was honestly fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Right, I'm keeping an eye on the time because we've got a few more subjects we need to get through. But sure. I love those choices as well, and I've made a note of a couple of them. Well, let's move on to films. What films would you love to wipe?
So, I think from relatively more recent times, I'd love to see Top Gun 2 again.
Okay, I've not seen that. Yeah,
have you not? Okay.
No.
So, I genuinely think it's better than the original.
Okay, I've heard a lot of people say they enjoyed it more than they thought.
Yeah, and often sequels often get lambasted as not being as good as the original. There's been odd sort of breakouts over time, but for me, this is definitely one. I mean, the first film's it's still a great film. Obviously, it's a long time ago, but this I think is fantastic. And when you read into it, I mean, obviously Tom Cruise, whatever you think of him, really does go to the nth degree to be the movie star doing his own stunts when he doesn't need to. Often, really quite horrendously dangerous stuff, really. He must be an insurance underwriter's nightmare on these films. But what he also did was, for that film, a lot of the other cast had to learn to fly.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So he already could. And he insisted on a lot of the other main actors in that film having to do flying, which is why a lot of the scenes, even close up, there's no issue with it with stunt people because it's actually the actors sat there in some of the scenes. So that I thought was interesting in terms of the dedication to it. It's just a great film. But the thing around it was, at the cinema, the atmosphere, it was full. And there was almost like a cheering kind of at the end. And, I hadn't seen that in a cinema for such a long time, that kind of atmosphere around it. And people, almost, I suppose men particularly kind of, such a long time from the first film to the second film, but for it to be that good a film as well. And it just had that about it. And there's been, I guess, not that many films in modern times that draw that as much, I don't think, and that kind of response of filling the cinema and and that kind of atmosphere is almost something of, sadly, probably times gone by for the most part. And so that was, I thought that was great.
It's a really random film to get a sequel all those years later as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, completely. But the storyline worked as well with it. The way they adapted it back to the first film and and tied all that in as well. It was, again, it's a strange choice. I've gone for deliberately quite odd choices on this, actually. I've gone for different things for different sort of reasons, really. But that's one.
It's funny, just going back to Tom Cruise as well, it's funny what you say that he went from being this like sort of 80s, 90s, pretty-faced, good-looking actor to becoming this guy that does all these out there stunts himself and puts his body on the line. It's incredible, that kind of turnaround in who he was and who he is now.
Yeah, completely.
Nobody's telling him no. That's the thing.
No, he just does them, doesn't he? He just does these stunts no matter what. And I've got to pay a little bit of homage to him because, of course, they did some of the filming for one of the Mission Impossible films in Birmingham.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, and it's quite funny if you watch it because they've obviously done different CGI and bits within it. But you can actually, if you know where it is. The above New Street train station and all that, you actually know where he is, where he's walking around and whatnot, and they're trying to make out it's I think it's the airport in Dubai or something, the way they tried to decorate it and all. But it was quite good, and
it's funny they did that here. The Cornetto trilogy, The World's End.
Oh yeah,
a lot of that was filmed in a couple of the local towns near me.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But it's funny. It's really interesting because my wife is always, we're watching a film or show, and she'll say, "Oh, that looks really nice there. That looks really nice there." But then I'll always put her to that film where there's one scene where they're just walking down a road, but it actually cuts between the two towns. They've edited it and they've made it look like it's one walk. And I've said to her, we're watching this scene, but that could be 3 or 4 different places. It's really clever. It's when you see that you realise how clever the editing can be in a film.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool. All right, what's your next choice?
So this is a bit random, and I thought about this, but I'm going to go with Wolf of Wall Street.
Okay.
So it's quite a long film, but for me, I think it's one of I mean, he's a great actor anyway, but I think it's one of Leonardo DiCaprio's best performances. I think it's the one he probably should have won the Oscar for, and he lost out to, I think it was Matthew McConaughey for Dallas Buyers Club at the time, which again, another great film, great performance. But I was kind of disappointed that he didn't get it for this, and he ended up getting it for the Revenant, which I don't think is as good, and doesn't stand up for me as one of his better films. But yeah, this I think his performance is obviously he's playing a real life person as well in Jordan Belfort, who obviously I think we're not going to sort of go into his sort of behaviour, I suppose, as trying to laud it as positive, because ultimately a lot of people lost money and all the rest of it, but it kind of pays, I suppose, a form of homage to a time as well, doesn't it? That kind of yuppie era as it was here, and it goes on as obviously the excesses and that kind of pre-internet age, that film. And I just think that the performance is just amazing in that, and it is a great film. And the portrayal again of the back and forth, even with sort of the FBI, where he's this rich guy and he gets them on his boat and he's trying to sort of bribe them, and they sort of reject it or whatever, and he's sort of going, how much money do you make, and it's all that kind of stuff. And then the FBI agent sort of turns to him and says, "I'm just thinking about what a legend I'm going to be when I seize this boat." Back at the bureau, it's that kind of interplay between, you can't buy everybody, or there's all of those little things that come into it. And Margot Robbie's great in it. Obviously plays this sort of one of the sort of main love interests in it. I think actually a really good actress in terms of where she's come from, in terms of from The Neighbours all the way through to sort of Hollywood. And Jonah Hill is in it as well. But yeah, as a film, I mean, I still enjoy it when we've watched it again. But I'd love to just watch that, from the beginning, having mind wiped it and just enjoy it.
I've seen it the once. It's one of those films, again, like you said, not necessarily lauding the real life events, but it's a fascinating insight into that period of time, isn't it? And that section of society. And again, Leonardo DiCaprio, from his initial film roles to him becoming quite, I don't want to say underrated in that sense, but character actor, whether you like him or not, the roles he's done and the variety of roles he's done has been quite impressive, I think, in the latter years. Yeah.
Yeah, he went on a bit of a run around that time, because we also saw him in, I think it was the Django film as well, with Jamie Foxx. He's really good in that as well, plays quite a nasty sort of character in that as well. But yeah, he's got that range of, he just properly goes for these roles. I mean, I did read something that was quite interesting. There's a scene in the film, I don't know if you remember, where he's, I think him and Margot Robbie are not terribly getting on very well. And she's sat on the floor, shall we say, in a provocative pose. I'm trying to keep it clean for your podcast. And he's sort of there, looking, shall we say, and he's saying, "Oh, have you never noticed how the bear's got a funny eye and it's a camera? So wave at the security guys or something." And she's, angry with him. But I didn't know until I only read this quite recently. Apparently, Margot Robbie deliberately didn't wear underwear in that scene to make it more realistic. No, genuinely, apparently that's what she did. She wanted to make it more realistic, so that you think it's just she sat there like that, and that's not the case, but actually apparently it was.
Well, there's so many things like that, like in Back to the Future when he swigs the whiskey in the car towards the end of the film, and it was they actually swapped real whiskey in for it. Michael J. Fox wasn't expecting that, so his reaction was real there as well. All sorts of examples like that. Okay, do you have another choice in
I've
films?
got one more on films.
Yep.
I wouldn't say I was a huge fan of like war films generally, but I don't mind them. But this one really got me, and it's Hacksaw Ridge with Andrew Garfield.
I've not seen that.
So I do recommend that one. I'll be honest, and I don't mind admitting this, I actually cried twice at the cinema. Watched, at two different points. It was just that, I just thought it was that good. It's based on a true story. And at the end, some of the people who were there were still alive at the time, and they'd made a documentary, I think, just around the time of the film. And they actually sort of interviewed them, and he's honestly so emotional. But the portrayal of it, Andrew Garfield's portraying the film and whatnot, it's incredible. So it's a guy who goes to war, but he's anti-war. So he goes as a medic, but he refuses to bear arms. He refuses to shoot anybody, and he gets kind of a lot of abuse and almost tortured to some degree by his own side in the Americans, such of like, how can you be like this, blah blah blah. Whereas he was a much more sort of empathetic type person, but he ends up saving loads of people's lives in it and whatnot. And it's just so well done. And I say the bit at the end where they've kind of got the real people who were really obviously really old at that point as well talking about it. It's proper choke you up type stuff. So yeah, to me it's probably one of the better war films I think I've personally seen.
Real mixture of films you've got there.
I deliberately went for three different things. I wanted to keep it varied stuff and things that films I really really like and would genuinely want to watch again having not seen them. Those would definitely be three that would be up there for me.
I'm gonna go somewhere completely different now, and it's sporting world. So I think I said to you, and I say to everyone, there don't have to be sporting events you've had yourself, but they can be. It can be something you've seen on TV or you've watched.
For my sins, my team are Aston Villa. I'm going to bring up a semi-final. And the reason I bring up the semi-final is we lost the final. So, so I was at both. I was at both as a fan, but I won't bring up the final because obviously that's more disappointing when you leave Wembley having lost. But the semi-final, this will be of effectively what is known as the old League Cup. It's 15 years ago now, and we played Blackburn Rovers over 2 legs, and we'd won the first leg away 1-0. So it was, second leg, evening, packed, full crowd under the lights, sort of January night. And in typical style as your football team, if you're not supporting one of the ones that are usually better, they often, becomes a bit of a roller coaster. So we went 2 goals down. so suddenly the 1 goal lead from the first leg, we're 2 down within, blah, blah, blah. But then it turns around, and the match finished up 6-4 on the night, 7-4 on aggregate, which obviously got us to the final that we then lost 2-1 to Man United. But we won't talk about that. But the reason I obviously talk about this in terms of from a sport point of view is just it's that roller coaster when, we were leading from the first leg, so everyone's going in on a real high, and then suddenly within 20 minutes you're going, what? How has this happened? And everyone's getting angry, and then you get a goal, and it was just all that kind of atmosphere of it, and then the whole thing about you get to Wembley, and what they'd done is they put those sort of little flags on the seats, so you could wave your little flag, so that everyone's got all the flags and everything. But one of the reasons I mention it is it's the old song where who's it by now? When I was just a little girl. I asked my mother.
Yes, yeah.
I can't think who sang it now. Is it?
I can't remember.
Is
it
not Doris?
Is it Que Sera Sera? Yeah?
Que Sera Sera, yeah. So
yeah.
I'm just who's I've got to look it up now. Doris Day. It was Doris Day. I should have backed myself. Okay. But of course, the lyrics to that are when I was just a little. So the song being that football fans often turned it about going to Wembley, but nobody changed the lyrics. So you're in the sort of Holt end of Villa Park with what is 98%, men singing, and everyone did sing. When I was just a little girl, I asked my mother, and nobody changed it. And to me, it just lives in the memory as one of those moments of like, that's just hilarious that everyone just sang it like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was just a great atmosphere, a great evening. Obviously, everyone was on a real buzz of getting to a final, and so I picked that one as something I went to that lives in the memory.
Yeah, I'll say two things on that one. One, again, I'm going to mention his name again, but Joey from the Game Club Pod, he's an Aston Villa fan and he goes to all the home games. So yeah, he'll have got an interest in that now. But what I will say is it's a great moment and I fully understand why you chose that. But as a Tottenham fan, I have it the other way. So I'm never more stressed than if I'm 2-0 up because we will invariably lose that. So 2 or 3 goals up and the amount of times we've lost it. So I think I've got the other, the way I react to a scoreline is totally different to you. I think
it was just a weird one the way it played out, and then to have like 10 goals on the night and all that was just a bizarre.
You got your money.
It was quite something really.
Okay,
and we went 1-0. We went 1-0 up in the final and lost 2. So we got that moment even in the final where everyone went, "Yeah, we got a chance. We can," and then. Yeah,
you can never relax.
You can never
relax with football.
No, definitely not. So that's up there. And then on a completely different note, we had the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham in 2022, which I think the interesting thing about this is I understand that you and I would probably have still been relatively young, but probably old enough to remember. Well, definitely old enough to remember. In 1992, the Olympics was in Barcelona. Now, I understand that Birmingham bid for that.
Oh,
and
really?
at one point, we're quite close, apparently,
Can you
to
imagine
getting that.
that?
And what? I mean, I'll tell you what, that Freddie Mercury song would have been different, wouldn't it? But yeah, so, and he obviously didn't get it. And so I think this was a big event. And the Commonwealth Games has been obviously in other UK cities. It had been in Manchester, been in Glasgow. And I think it's actually going back to Glasgow because Australia had got it for what will be next year now, but then they can't afford to do it or something in the state it was meant to be in. So it's going back to Glasgow again 12 years after they last had it. But, for Birmingham, I think this was quite it was a big event. And I think it was a very successful event. And also, I think off the back of COVID, I always think they just did so well to make it as successful as they did, given the 2 years that had gone prior and how difficult that must have been in terms of delivering the infrastructure for an event like that. And it was just a lot of fun, around the city centre and whatnot, and some of the stuff we went to, some of the events. But I'm going to pick one particular moment because I can't let this go. And Rich and Mrs. Shelano will not appreciate this, but I've got to because it stands out for me. One of the events we went to was the table tennis over at the NEC. And we had tickets for different events. We went to table tennis, we went to basketball, and we went to boxing. And so we're over at the table tennis. And then we're in this sort of, small little hall and whatever, watching this. And in the other sort of stand, for want of a better phrase, these kind of makeshift stands, on the screen, you can see Prince Edward was there. And then it finishes for like a half-time break or whatever it is, or, between matches. So they're taking a break or whatever, almost like a half-time at football. And you come back down to the main section and there's kind of like your refreshment stalls and all this sort of stuff. So there's me, Mrs. Shelano, Raging Rich, and another friend of ours by this stall. And if you think, the three of them are kind of facing on the stall, looking at sausage rolls and all this sort of stuff. Yeah. And I'm stood here, if you want, like facing them, but back towards the arena. And all of a sudden, out comes a load of these sort of suits. And in amongst these sort of suits is Prince Edward walking towards us. And I'm not making this up. He looked at me like we locked eyes for a millisecond. me in a that's Prince Edward, and him in a he looks a bit rough. I hope my security got an eye on him kind of way. And of course, I wanted to say to the other three who are facing the sausage rolls of like, it's Prince Edward, but I'm like, I don't want to do any sudden movements or bring any attention because some of those people around him have got guns and I don't want to get shot. So I'm saying nothing. I'm just going to look at him and I'm going to also, he's a member of the royal family, but I want to play it cool. I don't want to do the whole, so I'm like, I literally just went like that. And they're walking him out towards a fire exit, obviously out to the car park and off he goes. It's probably the easiest way to get him out. And literally by the time they've sort of walked far enough past us, I'm like going, and then all they see is sort of the back of his head walking towards the fire exit.
Oh, brilliant.
And I'm like, you missed an opportunity. A member of the royal family walked like 8 feet behind you while you're looking at a sausage roll. And out of the 4 of us, I was the only one who sort of saw him. It was just, that was my funniest moment, I think, of the event. But the actual overall event, just really enjoyed sort of the atmosphere and everything around it was great. Yeah, it was just a lot of fun. Again, and something when it's on your doorstep, you were able to put in for tickets, so you could, there's like a local ballot before a national ballot and all that, so it gives you a better chance. And between us, we managed to get to 3 events, and yeah, it was just a really enjoyable time. But that particular moment's just, I just can't.
That's a great story, but I'll be honest, if I was walking past a shop full of sausage rolls, it'd probably be difficult to get my attention away from it as well, to be honest.
I mean, looking at me, you'd think I'd have been the one looking at the sausage. I was just the way I was stood, I think, at the time. I was just, I was sort of side on and they were facing that. It was just the way it was, but that was a funny one. But just the whole event was great fun.
Did you have anything else from sport?
I've got one. It's kind of part sport and part gig, actually. But we went to one of these things where it's horse races, but then they have a band as well. But yeah, a few of us went a few years ago now to Windsor races. We had an afternoon out there, and then we saw Boyzone with the act. But it was great fun. And a friend of ours with us is a huge Boyzone fan anyway, but we all actually just enjoyed standing there, kind of singing those old songs and whatnot. And after a day at the races and whatever, it was just a great fun day. So it was just one of those things where you see those advertised of races at somewhere random and random acts performing, but actually it's a great day out. So that's something I'd say I wouldn't mind doing something like that again. That was a good one.
Cool. Yeah. I'm going to move us on to it because we still got a couple more to do.
Yeah.
And we could be, I could talk to you all night about some of these. It's great. So gigs and shows.
Yeah. I've got a bit of an eclectic mix on this as well.
I like the sound of that. Yeah.
So Mrs. Shelano wanted to go and see Mumford & Sons. It's quite a while ago now, actually, when, I think when they were obviously sort of around, mega popular. And, I'd heard a couple of their songs, wasn't, massively struck. And she didn't seem to sort of think anybody else that she knew would want to go. And she's like, oh, would you go? And I went, yeah, why not? Go on. And we went to see it. And it's one of the best concerts I've ever been to.
Really?
I thought they were brilliant live. Absolutely. In a way I wouldn't have, I wouldn't go in. I was like, I'd be all right. I know a couple of the songs. This will be all right. I was genuinely massively impressed. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And the funniest thing for me in terms of where we were was there was a woman next to us who'd clearly brought like 2 teenage sons or something like that.
Right, yeah.
And she'd obviously got no interest whatsoever and was their sort of chaperone and had brought them. And it was great because there's one of the songs where they go, you really effed it up this time. You might know the song. Yeah. And these 2 teenagers sing it, and you just watch the mother go, like pulling that face of disgust of like, I'm your mother, I've brought you to this, and I don't want to be here. And it was just great to see. We were all singing it as well, so she was also looking a bit disgusted at us of like, what is this? I don't understand. Why do you all want to watch this? But I thought it was great, and it probably wasn't something I would have massively gone to as a. That
makes it even better, doesn't it? When you go to something not expecting to enjoy it as much as you actually end up doing, it makes that night even better, doesn't it? Yeah,
it's the ones that surprise you, isn't it? Because you have the stuff that you go to that you think is going to be great that disappoints you, but when you go to something that you're not expecting amazing things, and then you go, oh wow, that was
Yeah.
great. So I'd probably definitely wouldn't mind seeing that one again. And then I'd go towards, on a comedy side, we went to see Stuart Francis, a Canadian
Oh, right.
comedian.
Yeah.
Used to do Mock the Week quite a lot over here. And we saw him at the Symphony Hall in Birmingham, probably the best part of a decade ago now. But we had really good seats, and I love that venue anyway, in terms of for seeing different shows and things I've been to. But it's one of the funniest hours I can ever remember. I was just side-splitting laughing. More so than Mrs. Shelano, actually. I think his humour maybe he's more that one-liner type stuff. And, he used to come out with those type of material. And I just absolutely thought it was one of the funniest things. And I've seen loads of comedians and have enjoyed loads of shows, but I've never sat there where someone's just kind of doing that continual daftness almost of jokes, that have been so carefully thought out and put together, and just telling them in that way. I was just literally in hysterics for a good hour.
Yeah, I do think it takes some guts to do that, because just to stand up on stage and try to keep that audience, because humour is so subjective, isn't it?
It is, and there's a few of them that do that kind of material. It's so much cleverer almost than you give it credit for, because you have comedians that stand on stage and they kind of do the anecdotal stuff and they drift around stories. But to have somebody stand there and purely try and do sort of well thought out kind of puns and material, it's not for everybody, but some of it is just so clever. And I think he's one of the best I've seen for that kind of material. I used to enjoy watching him on Mock the Week, but actually seeing him kind of, up sort of close in that kind of environment, I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And I think he might have actually retired from touring now, but yeah, he was great. That as I say, I think it fell more into my humour perhaps than Mrs. Shelano's. But she still enjoyed it, but I don't think she enjoyed it quite as much as perhaps I did. It kind of plays into that sort of I don't know, teenage lad mentality a little bit, doesn't it? When you kind of that kind of some of the humour's just so silly that you kind of and then you just sort of appreciate it on another level if somebody sat and wrote those jokes and thought those things up and done that. There's another one that Rich and I often talk about that we haven't seen that we'd like to, is Tim Vine.
Oh yes, yeah, he's very much sort of snappy one-liner, isn't he? Yeah.
So he does a lot of that kind of stuff, and we've often said we wouldn't mind seeing him. But so I think Stuart Francis was probably the sort of closest equivalent to that kind of thing. And I do like seeing live comedy, and that's one that I really do remember and would love to see again.
Yeah, I've been to a local one a number of times. Yeah, I do. I think comedy nights are great. They're just great fun. Okay, and did you have a third?
I've got one more. So I know Rich, when he came on, obviously mentioned New York.
Yes, yep.
So I can't not mention New York as well, I don't think. But I'm going to cover something different, which is that we went to see Phantom of the Opera on Broadway.
Nice.
As 21-year-olds visiting New York. So I mean, obviously, Rich covered us going to see the wrestling at Madison Square Gardens, which again was fantastic. But this was a bit different because
what a contrast!
A real contrast. But also, we stood out quite a bit. I'll be honest, in that particular, when you walk at the theatre and everyone around you is probably more our age now and up, looking at like sort of four youngsters. If we sort of turned up, tried to be a little bit smart, trousers and a shirt, looking ridiculous, getting our British ID out to try and get a drink, in the foyer and all that. But you know what? It was such a good show. But the thing that was interesting around it is, do you remember Michael Crawford, who played Frank Spencer in Some Others Do Have Them? He'd done that show for a long time. And I think when we went, he'd just finished. So I think he'd done a long stint. And he wasn't in it, which is the only thing I think would have been probably topped it off if he'd been in it as a British lead. So I think it was back to kind of an American lead, but it was a fantastic show. But the funniest thing about it, in terms of the four of us there, is that what you'd argue was, shall we say, the most cultured of the four of us fell asleep, right? And the slightly, what would you call, rougher, less articulate of us were there going, "This is wonderful," right? And it was just that kind of moment where it wouldn't have looked out of place in something on TV, because here's this guy who you think is going to be at the four of us would have been the absolute love this, and he's in his chair like that. He was like, "I found it boring," and we're like, "What are you on about? This is amazing."
Fair play to you all for getting to do it.
Well, it was one of those things where you go and do, something like that in terms of going for like being 21 and all the rest of it, and going to the States, and New York or whatever, was trying to do all the things that you'd really want to do. But the weird thing with it was where we were staying was just around the corner from sort of that area, so it was kind of on the doorstep. And I think the actual theatre that we went to was literally a stone's throw, from our hotel in the end. It was, so it's kind of from a scheduling point of view. The only problem was with one of the quieter nights, so there weren't that many shows on that night or something, and we had problems because we got them tickets for something else, and you're trying to fit things in a very small number of days. But that was obviously a renowned show, so absolutely great to get to go and do that. But again, it's the things you remember, which is him falling asleep is the what just jumps out massively. But it would have been great, I think, if Michael Crawford had still been in it, just because of the obvious sort of British connection and all the rest of it. But take nothing away, again, fabulous show, and definitely would love to have sat through that again. So, but bit of an eclectic mix on.
Definitely, but a good one. That was a real good mix there. So I think we're on to the last subject, which I said is life moments. Now, I think I should have said to you, don't need to get overly personal, but are there 3 things or up to 3 things that have happened that you say, do you know what? Yeah, I'd love to go through that again.
There's probably, there's a couple of things. I mean, again, you don't necessarily go through all the obvious stuff, but the one thing I think about this is not a shameless plug for the book, genuinely it's not. But when you kind of write, you write out and you try and go through the potential traditional route of agents and all that sort of stuff. It's such a challenging process of you don't get an answer back, or you get we've read, they send 3 chapters no, or not for, and all this sort of stuff. And then I had somebody respond, an agent in London who said, "Oh, send me more. And they were really positive, and they were like, "This is I like this story. This is what you can do to make it better." I mean, look, spoiler alert, they didn't take me on as a client in the end, but they were massively helpful in that kind of redrafting process. But one of the things that lived with me, and I've kept the email, because they wrote in the email, they went, "Oh, I actually think you do have a talent for doing this." Because you can have people read something and say, "Oh I really enjoyed that. It was better than I thought it would be from you," or you get that kind of thing, almost a backhanded compliment, or "Oh, actually, that's really But when it's somebody you don't know, and it's somebody who's obviously works in that sort of profession,
exactly,
to have them say, "Actually, I really enjoyed this. This is, if you do this, I think it'll make it better. But I actually think you've been able to come up with something and do that." That meant a lot, and that person, I did write back to them. When I actually ended up self-publishing the book and saying, "Look, I've self-published it now, but I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time, to give me the feedback that you did and the advice that you did, which I think massively improved, the draft to the end product, and, how that, helped me, I think, in terms of now with the second one even, I think back to some of the things they said and the advice, and just that feeling of, well, they've, they obviously did think, you maybe could be able to do this, at least it's not terrible, it doesn't have to be amazing, but, they thought it was good. And that just was something that, when you write out to a lot of people and you don't hear much, if somebody just gives you that time and that opportunity to help you improve and give you that confidence boost, that was quite something.
And it's just that independent, that, like you said, that person that isn't in your inner group of friends or family, it just really resonates, and doesn't it? Yeah.
So that was definitely up there. And then I'm not going to go into kind of like, I suppose, like wedding type stuff and whatnot, and I suppose there's an element of this that is a little bit personal. But Mrs. Shelano had not been very well, shall we say, and she'd had ill health, and a part of sort of coming through that, we ended up going on like a really nice holiday, which was to Barbados, and it was kind of a bit of a thing after a very rough time, And again, you talk about moments. There was loads of great things in that particular trip, and we used to get out and about and on the reggae buses, and we went to the cricket ground and did the tour, and all sorts of different things that you wouldn't do, and to the Mount Gay Run place and all that. But the moment I'm going to come out with, and I don't know what she'll think of this, and I don't know what anybody listening will think of this, but this is a true story. So we came out of our complex the one day, and there was a guy begging, but it wasn't in the traditional style you tend to see in the UK these days, very aggressive. He's very polite. It's like a good morning. Yeah. How are you? Blah, blah. My name's Andrew, blah, just sort of where you've come from, all this sort of stuff. Yeah. And then, after a bit of patter, he asks for some change and all that. And, all right, he's an older fellow, he's obviously, he's a bit sort of down on his luck, etc. So we gave him a few coins, whatever. On our way, thought, won't see him again, right? Famous last words. Many days later, we're just leaving like a beachside bar. And who's coming along the beach with rum bottle in his hand? Blah, blah, blah. This is in the day, or say late afternoon, early evening. So he's walking along. And he spots us. And he shouts us by name. Because we'd exchanged like names when we'd met him, right? Yeah. And he shouts us by names. And me and Mrs. Shelano went, Andrew! Like he was some old relative. Oh. But the tourists and that around, the looks we were getting of like...
Oh, really?
Yeah, of like, why do you two know this guy's name? He's blatantly sort of, homeless, down and out, beggar type guy. This is, kind of giving you the idiots kind of look. Anyway, so we ended up sitting on the beach, and it was like coming into sunset, that sort of time of day. And we're sat on the beach, and he's moaning about his life. I think he was diabetic. He was living in some sort of, supported accommodation or something like that. He's clearly, not in a good way. And, he may not probably genuinely no longer be with us, I imagine. But so he's kind of moaning about his life. And then Mrs. Shelano's moaning about her life in terms of the experience that she'd had. And I'm just sat there. And I'm looking at, the end of the Baywatch credits. You used to have that sunset. It was like looking at this. Is like, this is amazing. How many times you're going to experience this sort of thing in your life? Yeah. And I just sort of turned to them. I was like, can you two not just stop moaning for a minute and just enjoy this almost, right? And it was like that. And the three of us sat together on the beach, just watching the sunset or whatever. It was just one of those strange moments in life that you go, that's a wow moment when you look back. That's not going to happen again. And
it's so far removed from your everyday life as well, isn't it?
And it was just that thing about it being, real life. He's in his real experience. You're just tourists there, but you're in your own experience or whatever. But then as a group, you just sat there, sort of in that moment on a beach, looking at the, in terms of a sort of natural moment of sort of life. Nobody's got a phone out or anything like that. There's none of that kind of thing. It's just sat taking that in, kind of thing. And it's a strange moment. And there's loads of things from stuff like that you could talk about. But to me, that's the one that always sticks with me. In terms
I think that's a good one. Like you said, it's an interesting one. It's just that random encounter as well, isn't it? It's a random encounter, and then the stories that come from that. So
it's the fact that I think we saw him like toward the beginning of the holiday, thinking you're never going to see him again anyway, kind of thing. It's one of those, and it was quite a few days later where suddenly he appears. Not in the same place as where we'd seen him either. Yeah. So, you kind of go, we might not have been there that day, or, we'd been somewhere, he could have been somewhere else. It was a bit like, is that a fate scenario then of that kind of thing of like, well, hang on a minute, that's weird. That's twice we've randomly seen this bloke in two different places. And there we are all going, we remembered his name, he remembered our name. So, the amount of tourists who probably would have walked past him in the first day, never even spoken. And I kind of think, people like look at you, it's like, in terms of knowing his name or whatever, it's just like, he's still like, the guy's still a human being. He's down on his luck and all the rest of it. But he was inoffensive. offensive with it, and he was clearly, he knew stuff about England. He was an older guy.
Just needed an opportunity to talk, wasn't it? Yes.
He probably just enjoys to talk. Enjoyable to talk to people and just have a bit of a chat. But yeah, in that kind of moment, it was
Okay.
And I think if I lived the moment again, it would have to be with him as well.
Yes,
so I think to make it real, I mean, he's probably, as I say, he may no longer be with us, but I think we'd have to go through. It'd have to be the same.
Okay. And do you have one more?
No, I think that was going to be my final one. I think in the end, I thought I'd finish on that one as a different.
You've picked some great choices there, and I hope you enjoyed that.
Do you know what? It's been really interesting because kind of when you think about things to talk about, and then sometimes you think, what am I actually going to then say when I talk about those things? But I wanted things that were different, so you don't just obviously cover the same types of stuff over and over again.
You definitely did that. You definitely did that.
So so it's been really quite enjoyable just sort of talking about some of these things actually, and then I'm remembering events like I'm having that moment where I'm remembering the moment where I look Prince Edward in the eye, and you're going to have to get him on now to talk about that.
Well, if Prince Edward, if you're listening and you want to come on and give your version of the story, please do. I'm
sure
if anyone knows him,
I'm sure it'd be a memorable moment in his life. Do you remember when you were at the table tennis at Birmingham NEC at the Commonwealth Games?
He's probably like, I just wanted to go get a sausage roll, but these people were in the way and I couldn't get.
My security were like, no, come on, sir, to the door.
Look, I want to also, at some point, I'll get you and Rich also on for the dinner party episode. I think they're, I also enjoy doing those. It's kind of getting to know people in a slightly different way, because I think food is also a very interesting way of finding out more about people. So I'll get you on for that at some point. All I want to say is thank you very much, firstly, for coming on and spending some time. As I said, it's always fascinating to hear what people pick. To say also thank you for interacting on the socials, because you guys are great at what you do, and it's always great to see new people come on and do put out some really good episodes. So I will give you the floor again just to promote, 1, your podcast, and 2, your book again. Go for that, and then we'll close the episode out.
Okay. Well, the book, for the first book, should I say, The Doctor's Hidden Patients, is out now. You can go to my website at shelanobooks.co.uk or Amazon or through Draft 2 Digital and pick up a copy from there. The second book, I'm working on it. I'm getting there. Hopefully we'll get that one out at some point, maybe later this year. You never know. And then we're obviously carrying on with the Middle-aged Bodcast. Follow us on all platforms: YouTube, Apple, Amazon, Spotify, etc. Season 3, episode 1 has just gone out today, but the previous 2 seasons are there, including obviously an episode with Dan, and then there's loads of other stuff on there. It's a good listen. So check us out and follow us on socials or via those platforms.
Give them a follow now. Go on right now. There you go. Right, so okay, thanks again. And from me, you're listening to me, so you know where to find me. But if you fancy either coming on and having a go at this, or being on for a dinner party episode, or want to give me an idea for a general episode, or even just want to say hi, you can find me at Casting Views across all social platforms. So I'll see you next week for another episode of Casting Views.
2, 3, 4. If I want your opinion, I will give it to you. Come on, take what we've got, 'cause you need it. Don't make us get a spark and force feed it. Come on,